reveal exclusively that short people are the scourge of the world. Behind every human disaster, there is always a group of powerful short people. The President of France, the German Chancellor Scholz, US Treasury Secretary Yellen, Putin, Kim Jong-un, the list goes on. The statements above are clearly absurd, as they fly in the face of the fact of reality. However, as we've seen in the past year, if you replace the word short people with Jewish people, the same statement takes on a different, more sinister connotation. Ayn Rand wrote, quote, "Racism is the lowest, most crudely primitive form of collectivism," end quote. A racist person
Do we need to re-begin?
Daniel, you're right.
Can you hear me? I think the recording stopped.
Yes, I don't know if that means we're still live or not.
I believe we are.
Okay, we'll continue then, and maybe the recording will kick in a bit later on. So we'll carry on for the moment.
I think Daniel might have crashed.
Yes, yeah. Well, let's continue.
Okay. So a racist person lacks the intellectual power to judge a person's character and focuses instead on unchosen physical characteristics. That's why racists are obsessed with skin color. Even emojis must have different skin tones, implying that a brown thumb up counts more than a less brown one, and certainly more than a yellow one. The scandal of primitive thinking about people has been on display in the form of anti-Semitism for the whole of the past year. Until then, showing anti-Semitism used to be a career-ending event. Words like anti-Zionism were used instead to thinly disguise anti-Semitism. Today, in an ugly lurch back to the Germany of the 1930s, it's open season on Jews again.
Welcome to the reality show. We're joined today by Alex and Natan. Thank you very much for joining us today. Let me start with you, Alex. I just wanted to see what your thoughts are on this past year in terms of the anti-Semitism that you've seen and how it compares with prior, of course, to October the 7th.
Yes, so anti-Semitism is one of these things that is so entirely irrational and conspiratorial. And whilst the manifestations of the anti-Semitism take different forms throughout history, the same themes definitely seem to repeat themselves. The past year has certainly been very disappointing. It has been it was extremely disheartening, I would say, to see the mass media and the politicians and all of the various talking heads within about a week of October the 7th trying to suggest all manner of different interesting conspiracies surrounding it. And I think that it was certainly a little bit of a cold splash of water in one's face. And it's certainly been, at least for me personally, I would say a year of great reflection on the state of things and feeling positive actually to the future.
Yeah. And the same question to you, Natan. Well, what has been your experience across the last year in terms of what you've observed and seen in the country generally and across the world?
I mean, when you're inside Israel, you don't really, get to experience anti-Semitism because, granted, you live with Jews. So, it wasn't anything personal, but I think that if anything did shock me this year, if anything surprised me, was the explosion of anti-Semitism. I mean, I knew there were a lot of forces out there who are anti-Israel. We all know about the anti-Semitism in the Muslim world. We know what's going on in the universities. But I think that as they call it, kind of quote unquote, the classic anti-Semitism that rose in Europe in the lead up to the Nazi rise in Germany, I think that was, to me at least, it was unexpected, at least not in the scale that we've seen in the past year. I mean, the new right, or the new woke right, that's been just exploding on Twitter, which is X now, is really unbelievable. Since Elon Musk basically took over Twitter, turned it to X, and gave everyone free speech, so to speak, we've seen how this was used. This was just taken advantage of to give a voice to all of these really just disgusting people. And there's a question of how much did the platform fester anti-Semitism and how much it was already there and just waiting to come out. I don't know. I think it's a little bit of both. I think culturally we were probably kind of ready for this. But yeah, it's I mean, it's scary. It's, I'm thinking to myself, maybe Israel can win the war against its enemies here in the Middle East, but after that, it will have to face another enemy that's rising in the West, which is troubling.
Yeah, that's true. And you're right that X has seen an increase in anti-Semitic views in the last year or so. However, I find it interesting that people like Khamenei is allowed to tweet, post messages on X. If anything else, because we are allowed to see what kind of evil, rotten creature of an individual is, and how bad the ideology that these monsters spew out is actually properly evil. So in a way, by being able to see the ugly side that usually stays behind, lurches in the shadows and only throws a stone and never shows a face. Probably it's good to see which of our neighbors, which of our institution, which of our friends are actually harboring this kind of views. So under the point of view, probably it's good that people are coming out in the open, even if they're emboldened just by the fact that that's the majority view, even if they are total second-handers, making the statement that they make emboldened by the fact that they know that some other people will give a thumb up and all this kind of stuff. So yeah.
I think I wanted to pick up on the fact that a lot of it is online, admittedly, but a lot of it has actually transitioned into the public realm in a way that you haven't seen before. And it's like seeing the internet come to life in front of you, isn't it? On the streets of major cities, where the placards are actually held by humans instead of tweeted by invisible humans. And you can see the faces of those people doing it, and you can see the amount of support from people watching demonstrations, or people sort of giving the secondary support to the kind of protests in favor of terrorism. And the extent to which that's occurred, things like the sort of rhyming form of anti-Semitism, from the river to the sea, as if it's all come out of Farfor's school of how to be an anti-Semite. It's all of that is evident how you're training children, not just in the schools of UNRWA, but on the streets of London and New York, in how to attack and belittle and decry the existence of Jews.
So sorry, before we go on, I'd like to make a point that when we say anti-Semitism, it's obviously we mean Jew hating. You mean the kind of hate that's directly only to the Jews, because you often see the comments from the smart asses, "Oh, Muslims are Semite too," Yeah, but come on, if you try and change the context of the debate, well then we don't even talk to people like you. But I just wanted to make sure that if we see one of these comments, it's like, yeah, get a life.
It's just a plainly obvious rationalization, because that these people, like, ask them, well, what is your opinion of Jews? Do you hate them? So they'll say, yeah. I mean, they just use it as a kind of, I don't know, like a rhetorical kind of dodging point or something. But yeah, it's just a dishonest claim.
I think it's a way of undoing every existence of anti-Semitism up till now, isn't it? If you can muddy over the word, if you can make it mean something different, then all of the evidence of Jews being hated since, the Second World War or whatever, it can be eradicated and confused with hatred of people generally, and therefore it dilutes the reality in people's minds. But Alex.
Yeah, I mean, it also kind of reminded me at the very beginning, I would say, of the war, kind of October, maybe the very end of October. There was a former colleague of mine who worked with me actually at an Israeli company. Very, what would I say? I love the latest thing kind of individual. Not Jewish, but that didn't really matter, of course. And she made this sort of extremely asinine comment, trying to redefine the word intifada. So she said, well, the word intifada actually means a fight back from oppression and anti Semitism. And I said, on what planet? In what sort of Judith Butler-esque universe are you living in whereby that is what the word intifada means? She didn't know that was a word in Arabic. I mean, I said in Arabic it literally means to shake off. It's a violent uprising. It always is. There's no other way for that to simply be interpreted. And I think as well that a lot of the blatant anti-Semitism has also been at the same time extremely insulting to one's intelligence, because again, it's trying to all the time change the rules of the game. Well, of course, the Palestinians, such as they are, could never possibly be anti-Semitic because they're Semites too. We get that. It's a completely ridiculous argument. And I was even talking a little bit in the production meeting about the I would say the kind of historical inheritance that I'm passing down to my children, and you're kind of explaining family history, and yeah, there's pogroms and Shoahs and the treatment as well of the Jews in Yemen, where the girls had to get married at 13 years old, because they would be stolen by rival Arab clans. And let me tell you, that was not because they were both just a couple of Semites who were having a bit of a disagreement. That is, to its core, irrational Jew hatred and victimizing. And it changes the way it displays itself every generation. But at its core, it is the same thing. It's frustrated me so much seeing these quasi-intellectuals on whether that's Piers Morgan or whether that's hosting some ridiculous podcast where they're spewing their asinine ideas. Just again, completely replacing the term, the definition of words. It's the postmodern right, I think, as well. Candace Owens she's a postmodernist. Don't know if she realizes it, but she definitely is.
Yeah, that's definitely one of the main issues, and how suddenly definition of words and terms and symbols and actions take on a totally different meaning when it comes to hide anti-Semitism. For example, we seen the worst one in my book is the redefinition of genocide, which is killing Palestinians in self-defense, by the way. And that in itself, using the word genocide in the first place, a word that was invented to address the Holocaust during the Second World War, against the very people who the accusation is done towards, it's just absolutely repellent. It not only shows that you are an evil person if you do that, but also you're an ignorant evil person, because you clearly don't know the context or the historic context. It's the same as you were mentioning about Intifada. If you know what Intifada was labeling, you don't need to know Arabic to know what it actually means. But that's the kind of choices that people use. And of course, we covered all the terms. If you go to the briefing objective, you can see criticism of all the various terms. Binswanger addressed some of these, like occupation, apartheid, all this kind of terrible stuff that it's been levied against Israel just because it's Israel. Like in the case of the killing of a professional criminal like George Floyd, people don't get upset about the murder of Jewish people. That is fine if you're a criminal. If you're Jewish people, well, things are different, and that's been the worst, the most sickening kind of double standard that we've seen in the last year.
And the example you cite there, Alex, of the colleague at work, you see how people are trained to be amateur propagandists themselves by semi-repeating what they've half heard or half read and don't understand, but feel like they feel like that's the virtuous position because they're surrounded by that narrative the whole time, together with the violent talk that it centers around. And that's sickening to see how easily people don't question, don't open their minds, don't examine properly what it is that they're spouting before they reissue it in another form to another human and act as a conduit for it to pass among more of us. I think language is particularly one of the things that has been tackled by, you've seen all sorts of people demonstrating their anti-Semitism through language, including the police here in the UK, trying to redefine what jihad means in a more friendly manner so that it can have its own balloon instead of it being something we should be arrested for calling for. But Natan, have you seen the use of language in particular being a problem in terms of how anti-Semitism has been heightened in the recent times?
It's interesting because in the past several years, you started to see all this talk about globalists, right? There was everybody was invoking this word, globalists. It's these globalists, the Schwabs of the world, or the George Soros and all these people, and this is how package deals are really dangerous, because I'm sure that some people really looked at this term globalism and they didn't really have any opinion. They were not thinking about Jews. But this term, which is non-essential because, it package deals legitimate globalism, like free trade and just traveling around the world and stuff like that, to be a globalist in that sense. But it also packaged the globalism of socialists who want to kind of impose a world government, or a lot of regulations from the European Union. And this is what happens. You start to use these ambiguous, vague terms that eventually they go to really dangerous places, because in the mind of the person holding it, he doesn't know what's essential. And then without noticing, they start to change it from globalist to, well, because you can't really be angry at globalists. Like, who is a globalist? It's not essential, like I said. So what these anti-conceptual mentalities, what they do is they look for a group that can be the target of their ire, and then they just target the Jews. So they just replace that with Jews, and I think that's something that I recognized at the time as very dangerous. And you didn't go over the etymology of the word anti-Semitism, right? Because my internet crashed.
No, we didn't. If you want to.
Oh, yeah, no, I was just if you just look at the online, there's I searched online etymology dictionary, and for anyone who doesn't know, anti-Semitism is a term that was, so it says here, it was first used by Wilhelm Marr. So he was a German radical nationalist and race agitator who founded the Anti-Semiten Liga in 1879. So that's late 19th century. And that's where the term came from. It was specifically designated to target Jews, to to offer theories that are anti-Jewish, and that's just how it remains. So to start playing around with the word, this wordplay, to now include everybody who's not Jewish, there was a specific context in which this term was used, which was the late 19th century in Europe, with Europeans who had a minority of Jews living amongst them, and these nationalist, racist Germans in the beginning, they started targeting Jews and having all these theories against Jews. So they termed a coin for that, anti-Semitism, and that's why we use the term. And that's it. That it means hatred for Jews. And sadly, as you can see, it's still relevant today. Maybe if it wasn't relevant, so we could say, okay, let's rethink about this concept. But it's as relevant as ever, and there's no reason to change it. And anyway, the purpose of concepts is to use them so we can refer to something in reality, to some objects in reality. And when we use anti-Semitism, we mean something by it. So this is what we mean, and anybody who tries to just divert the conversation like that, he's just being dishonest.
Yeah, definitely. I want to thank PC for his super chat. Thank you very much. He says Facebook is full of anti-Semites. Yeah, well, we've certainly seen that. We've seen it across a lot of the social media for sure. Now, I noticed that somebody in the chat, I won't name them, of course, in this case, but said, was there ever a genocide other than the Holocaust? Well, you could certainly mention the Uyghurs, couldn't you, as an example of that. But of course, nobody ever wants to listen to that particular case either. But that is obviously, a relevant example. But Alex, let me come to you. I mean, there are so many areas we've seen when it comes to anti-Semitism. I mean, so many different levels, whether it's institution or politics. What have been your? I hesitate to use the word highlights, but what has struck you and sticks in your mind in the past year, particularly in terms of what surprised you out of what you've heard coming out of the people's mouths at the upper echelons, let's say, of society?
Well, I suppose we also have to think about, the sanction of the victim as well. The Palestinians are to a certain degree suffering through their own choices, of course. And therefore we must address that, and anything that they do is a reflection of their pain and therefore is okay. So it's okay then for Abu Mazen Mahmoud Abbas to have written an entire dissertation on Holocaust denial, and for him to be held up by the Americans, for example, the democratic establishment, as the partner for peace. Abu Mazen, who rehashes all of the same ludicrous anti-Semitic conspiracies, like, for example, the Khazar conspiracy theory, which from a linguistic level falls apart at first analysis because Jews don't have a Turkish Hebrew language like they do with Ladino or like they do with Yiddish, right? So, and it's things like that. Of course, from an institutional level, we cannot ignore the United Nations. The United Nations maybe is the apex of anti-Semitism, because there you have all of the barbarians who are, you want to talk about a genocide? Okay, so why not recognize the Armenian genocide? The UN certainly, I don't think they would do that. It's so it's all of these kind of various moving parts, all of these various things. And I suppose as well, it is as Israelis, our complacency, actually, because what did we think would happen? What did we think would happen if we allowed the Palestinians, such as they are, to run a state? Of course, they're going to teach their I mean, it's like ISIS raising children. I'm not sure if you remember there was a stories of the poor boys who were raised by ISIS, and that they were just absolute psychopaths by the time they were sort of 18, 19, and they couldn't be the finest psychologists in the world who tried to sort of deprogram them, and they couldn't. So the end result of either the Israelis being railroaded into these agreements like Oslo, or like the unilateral disengagement from Gaza, or whether it's just bad decisions and choices and the sanction of the victim. But the end result is 10-year-old boys from Gaza setting fire to houses of Jews in Kfar Aza and in Be'eri, as their parents or brothers, whatever, are clapping and smiling and saying, yes, go ahead. That is the end result. The end result of being indoctrinated for 2 generations in their jihadi nonsense is 10-year-old boys setting fire to the Jewish families and burning them to death, as happened in Kfar Aza.
Yeah. And, until now, we focused on the use of words and the free speech and all this kind of stuff. But what was actually happening last year, we've seen lots of actually physical violence taking place on the ground in our streets in the West, all over the world, really. We've seen, movement like BDS, which is
boycott, divestment,
and sanction against Israel, trying to attack Israel on a financial level. Then we've seen attacks on companies, even loosely related to supplying anything to Israel. We've seen even the wackos at Ben & Jerry boycotting the production of ice cream. I mean, really? We've seen the students in the campus, Jewish students being physically attacked and prevented from going to classes because they're Jewish. I mean, if that's not anti-Semitism, what more do you want? And all the kind of campaign and smear and all sorts of stuff that's been going on, even from the press. I mean, part of this action of evil, these physical attacks, have actually been sponsored by the media as well.
And you have seen some arson incidents in London even, or there was one particular one which was quite shocking, which looks to have, it's still going through the courts at the moment, but looks like it could well have anti-Semitic, background to it. And of course, just yesterday, I think, or the day before, there was a 58-year-old man was seen destroying the memorial in Brighton to October the 7th victims. Literally filmed, smashing it up and throwing teddy bears and trying to break the stone and all the rest of it. And when you see people tearing down the posters of victims of kidnap, for example, I mean, people who claim to have compassion and heart and who claim to care about humanity, want to defend hostage takers over hostages, and that truly blows my mind. And so many of these people aren't the bottom tier level intelligence. Many of them are the intelligentsia, and they're like, they're some of them are even famous artists. I remember one particular woman was exposed for having torn down posters of Hamas hostages. So, I mean, all of these are rank, disgusting elements, and they're so rife. And I think that's what makes it so disturbing to see. Natan.
Well, they're the intelligentsia without intellect. But yeah, I mean, we've started to discuss a little bit, well, how much of what is going online is happening also in real life. And I think that we have empirical data that states that, yes, anti-Semitism has risen drastically. I mean, I don't know how to compute it in real terms, but I covered personally a story about the Jewish community in the Bay Area in San Francisco, and people there talked about their personal experiences after October 7, and they said that they never in their lifetime have experienced anything like this. They said that some cases they felt like, they were back in the 1930s in Germany. And I mean, you have cases of parents having to pull their children out of school. I'm not talking about the universities. I'm talking about the K-12 schools, to pull them out of the classes because their teachers, they're indoctrinating them with pro-Palestinian propaganda, and classmates harassing Jewish peers. So, I mean, the situation is pretty bad, even though I should say that I visited myself the Bay Area and I didn't experience anything, on my part. But I guess it's different when you live within the city and the community, and I guess it also depends on which part you live in. But we've seen there was a German report that was released lately, stating that cases of anti-Semitism have risen by, I think there was 100% since October 7. So yeah, I mean, there's no denying it. It's up on the rise, and the question is, what do you do about it?
Yeah, it's on the rise and it's been tolerated, which is the real repellent outcome of it, isn't it?
Yeah, I wanted to say there's also, I think, the example that Alex gave of Abu Mazen and his dissertation that was anti-Semitic is a really good example of the power of principles. Because had Israel actually insisted and stood its ground and said, look, we're not dealing with anyone who is an anti-Semite. We're not dealing with anyone who writes things like that. Like, he's not a legitimate person. We will not tolerate this. I mean, that could have just completely changed how people, view about this. But when you, as state of Israel, you sanction these people, and you don't come to this issue with really clear principles, then you're just opening the door to this swarm of monsters and anti-Semites. And like, now it's like, it's too late. You can't close the door.
Yeah, absolutely. Alex?
Yeah, and just kind of more to Natan's point, that really more so than ever over the last year, I've really been thinking long and hard about Oslo, and really thinking it through really as I'm going to bed at night, and even thinking about people like Rabin, who were very polarizing. And certainly, I bear an incredible amount of animosity towards Rabin, but I also bear an incredible amount of animosity towards his killer, of course, because he is a psychopath who, of course, denied the Jewish people, or the Israelis, or me specifically, individually, denied me of the opportunity for us to exercise the ghost of Oslo, because the election that would have happened had Rabin not been savagely killed would have been a referendum on Oslo. And I think that the people would have resoundingly said, no, we're not going to do this. And the fact is that sadly the Israeli people have been railroaded into accepting a reality whereby Judea and Samaria, Area A of Judea and Samaria, is Judenrein, is absolutely Judenrein. And even the suggestion that it is acceptable in Area C for a Jew to build a shack is heresy, right? And that it is anti-Semitic to say that in order for you to feel satisfied with your piece of land, that you must exorcise it from the filth that is the Jewish presence there. And just that is paraded around like that's a normal thing to be thinking. And it's just and I also think to myself that it didn't necessarily need to be that way, and that the freedoms and the safety that my parents' generation had, going to Jericho, going to these places, is something that I'll never experience, and something that my kids will never experience. and it's tremendously sad to see, and I worry actually about the future. I worry about being railroaded into another catastrophic decision that we can't pull ourselves out of, and making deals with savage anti-Semites who are, worse than the Nazis. Really, what's the difference? Truly, what's the difference between their ideology and the Nazis? Very minimal.
Maybe at this point I can say something that will piss off our viewers. I think last week I was called a lefty, so now I will definitely be called a lefty. But I think this is kind of taking our conversation to a completely different field. But I think that paradoxically speaking, Judaism is like kind of a self-prophesizing phenomenon that creates anti-Semitism. And what do I mean by that? The very fact that the Jewish faith or the Jewish kind of identity or whatever you want to call it, the fact that it's so important for Jews to claim on to their Jewishness, to their Jewish collective identity, it does, I think, it does manifest like a view of, okay, well, we got to look at the world. We need to observe the world through groups. I mean, the whole kind of essence of Judaism really is tribalism. It's, well, we need to preserve the tribe. We need to preserve the group. Like, that's what's important. We need to sacrifice for the sake of the tribe. Well, sometimes they'll say, okay, you have to sacrifice for God, but mostly it's, let's protect the tribe. Let's marry within the tribe. And I mean, that is the view that once other nations adopt it, then yeah, it becomes very easy. I'm not saying that it's deterministic, like they have to go this way, but I'm saying that it's not that distant to embrace that view and say, okay, well, I want to protect my nation and my group, and so now we're going to start fighting other groups. And well, who's a group that's kind of looks successful and they're everywhere, and I don't know, we can just hate them for their success. Well, it's the Jews. So you have this kind of weird dynamic going on between Judaism and other peoples.
Yeah, although you could argue that's why Israel is worth protecting and arguing in favor of it, because it's not a state based on its Judaism. It's a state which has, okay, religion is a big component, but overall is a state where every religion is allowed, every ethnicity tolerated. You have Arab people living there. In fact, yeah, again, the only Arabs living in a free society are the Arabs who live in Israel. So,
Right. But there's like this paradox that, okay, so Jews need their own country so they can protect themselves from anti-Semitism, but their whole idea of, Jewish collective identity brings about these ideas of collectivism, which ultimately harm the Jews themselves. So I guess my point would be that we need to move forward to a world of reason, where you judge people individually and group identities do not matter. And then you won't need the Jewish state. And then you don't, you won't, I mean, fine, maybe you need it just for self-protection, because, the bad ideologies maybe will always be out there. But ultimately, if we do get to witness a second age of reason, a second age of Renaissance, I don't think that it will matter anymore. We'll just be able to have states that protect individual rights, and that's it. And when we live in a culture of reason, that's when anti-Semitism, it has no place. Because when people are rational, they view human beings for their ideas, for their actions. They understand that we are individually, we have free will. We act on our own accord. We're not these determined atoms that either the environment shape us, or the our genetics shape us. So when you live in a rational culture like that, anti-Semitism doesn't become a problem. And I just read this week, I think it was on the Free Press, Bari Weiss, she linked to a letter that George Washington sent the Jewish community in Rhode Island. And it's just heartening to read that, because you can just see what a different world that was, what a world that respected reason and rights. And he just said to the Jews, you're welcome here. We will protect your rights. We'll protect your property rights, and you won't have to fear, these hostile forces. And that's the world where we need to go to. So,
Yeah.
More reason, more liberty, more individual rights, and that will solve the problem.
Yeah.
But until we get there, I think we have to be, and I agree with you that there's obviously something deeply wrong with the idea that we even need to have a Jewish state, right? There is something wrong with that premise, of course, and I would love to live in a world where there was no need for such a thing. And I do not think of myself as having some kind of disembodied kind of collective Jewish identity, but the reality is also, how am I perceived? How is my family perceived? I also have to relate a little bit more to the world around me. Like, people often accuse Israel of being an ethno state. It's one of the sort of misconceptions actually that goes around. And they always say, oh, why should I support the ethno state? Blah, 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 blah. And Israel is not an ethno state. It's more diverse, actually, ethnically, if you like, than the United States. But would an ethno state in the Middle East necessarily be a bad thing? If the Yazidis had their own ethno states, would that be a bad thing? I don't think so. What about the Kurds? They certainly are being, genocided and massacred and all the rest of it. They should probably also have an ethno state. Does that mean that I philosophically agree with the premise of ethno states? Absolutely not. But I often do see the need for them. Not that Israel is one, but if it was one in the Middle East, I'm not so sure that would be a bad thing.
Yeah, and the tragedy is that there is an ethno state out there which is even made up, in a made up ethnicity, the Palestinians, with a made up past of a made up country, Palestine, and that is accepted as something is taken as something acceptable. Nobody ever argues against that, and that's part of the the double speak and the double standards that we've been seeing lately.
I do want to get to a few of the super chats we've received. So we've had several from Knows Too Much, 3 from Knows Too Much. Thank you very much for your generosity, Knows Too Much. He said, or he or she has said, anti-Semitism is bad terminology coined by an ignorant 18th century German who hated Jews. It should be replaced. Semites is pseudoscientific BS. And he goes on to say, using 2 different terms, anti-Hebrew for the ethnic component and anti-Judaism for the religious component, is much more accurate. And then he adds, note, anti-Jewish can sometimes work, but it's not well defined, which is why a different term for each of the 2 components is better terminology. I can see the point you're making there, Knows Too Much. I think also, but the essential is that we also know what it means when we see it. Online, in person, in organizations. But yeah, I understand the point you're making. Crusader General has given us a super chat to ask, what is Alex's channel? So I'll let you reply, Alex.
Sorry, this is actually my channel.
Yeah,
this is my channel for now. Yeah, I'm contributing.
Absolutely, and you're very welcome on it. We love having you with us. I think one of the things I wanted to mention in terms of what we're talking about here about tribes and groups. Obviously, when a group of people is under assault, that obviously tends to enhance the tribal aspect of their thinking, because it's a protective reaction to the assault. But I think one of the things that it would be worth pointing out is the fact that beyond Jewish people, people like us, for example, and people across the Western world are joining in defending Israel for against the enemies it's currently enduring. So the tribe is not limited to the Jewish people. I wanted to quote a rabbi who spoke in North London yesterday, who made this point. Obviously, he was doing part of an October 7th thing. He said, those that hate us, talking about Jews, obviously, those that hate us more than we realized. But those that like us more than we realized, and they are the majority. Now, I don't know the extent to which they are the majority, in which there's an awful lot of silent people, and we can talk about the role they play within this whole issue. But certainly there are many supporters of Israel who have also come to light as a result of the events of the past year. And I wonder what your reaction to that side of it is, as well as the negative side that you've seen. Let me come to you, Alex.
It is actually it's been very, very nice to see some of the kind of outpourings of support, right, from people necessarily you didn't really expect it. And I did also really get to analyzing and thinking about the Christian support, because it's something that's really always baffled me quite a bit. But there was something that they believe that rang certainly true for me in a way. They believe that whoever blesses the Jews will be blessed, and whoever curses them will be cursed. Well, absolutely, because if you're going to engage in something as ludicrous as hating somebody for being Jewish, then yes, indeed, your life is not going to be great, because you're going to also you're believing something completely and utterly irrational and not true. And I thought that was that's because in the Middle East it really is sort of the land of fairy tales and make believe, the kind of things that people believe here, right? The sort of conspiracy. So I have actually enjoyed seeing some of the support. I've enjoyed listening to people like Megyn Kelly, who I hadn't really sort of listened to before. And of course, listening to Ayn Rand, Central UK.
Yeah.
We live in an intellectual desert.
Yes, I know, absolutely, and of course it's people like Finkelstein and the kind who get the prominence, isn't it? Far too much of the time. And I think when you've seen people like Piers Morgan and those kind of people who are prepared to invite anyone on their show and sit in the dirty middle ground saying, I'm just providing a platform to both sides, and as if both sides are somehow equal. And you Tucker Carlson's in the same category, to be honest. Let me come to you, Natan. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, there are several people or bodies that we can mention. I think the Ayn Rand Institute has been kind of unmatched in their staunch support of Israel, and just the principled view that they're able to put forward throughout all of this. And of course, the Ayn Rand Center UK. Douglas Murray has been terrific. I mean, he's been just outstanding, I think. And he's kind of a superstar in Israel, I believe. Yeah, I don't know who else. I had another name, but I forgot right now.
The fact you're scrabbling about to find enough says something of itself, doesn't it?
Yes. I just remember it was Mosab Hassan Yosef.
Of course, yeah.
I mean, he's just amazing. But yeah, I mean, you just don't have too many people who are just idealistically, rooting for the good. It's mostly you have people in the gray areas. They're saying, yeah, well, there's bad stuff about Palestinians, but there's also bad stuff about Israel. And we're living in this moral gray land where people just cannot essentialized between the white and the black, between the good and evil. And that's just, that's just the state of our culture right now. I just wanted to go back a little bit and comment about the ethno state slur, because I think it's just hilarious that the people on the left, they blame Israel for being an ethno state while they're promoting an ethno state in Palestine, whereas the right wing anti-Semites who use this accusation against Israel, it's like they're doing it so they can say, no, we want our ethno state too. So it's like none of these people are actually honest, and they want their own ethno states. They just don't like the Israeli allegedly ethno state, which of course it's not.
And that inversion is constantly on display, isn't it? The genocide is another example of it in play.
Right. Yeah, and also the comment in the chat, I don't think that you need a specific like anti-Judaism concept, because I think it's perfectly legitimate to criticize Judaism. Like this, I don't see anything wrong with that. It's very easy to tell the difference between someone who comes to criticize Judaism from a kind of a scholarly, academic, intelligent position, where he actually has a point that he wants to put across, versus someone who just uses like these conspiracy theories and out of context, accusations against the Talmud and all these like conspiracy theories. Like they are just focused on hating Jews for being the group. So anti-Semitism is group hatred. It's hating the group for their inborn traits, inborn characteristics.
Yeah.
And that's why we do need the term anti-Semitism, and I think it's a good concept that really puts that thing under focus.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't use the term anti-Israelism if I want to criticize the policies of the state of Israel. That would be redundant, wouldn't it? But you were scrabbling around to find somebody who came out on the side of Israel. But doing the opposite is very easy, actually. We have a plethora of names, both people using social media to either further their position, making money, or I don't know, just please their founders. I don't know why they do it. People like, we mentioned Finkelstein, Mediasan, Candace, Cenk, Carlson, Piers Morgan, all these kind of people. It's just too revolting to even mention them all in a sentence. And of course, institutions have not been shy about making clear that they don't want Israel to win. That they're quite happy for the caliphate to be established where Israel used to be. Chief of all is the mothership of anti-Semitism, which is the UN. The UN is made up of lots of so-called legitimate countries which are not legitimate at all, and they are in fact dictatorships or absolute monarchies who come from the side of we want to destroy Israel. In fact, the most laughable of all was that I think in the summer, probably May or June, Iran held the human rights presidency in the UN, which is just, it's just too cruel to be a joke, but it's got the kind of status, isn't it? And we've seen how institutions for the UN, ICC, ICJ, have been weaponized in order to try and attack Israel from a different front, which is not necessarily the military one.
As well as individual countries, of course, coming out clearly against Israel, whether countries like Ireland or Spain or South Africa. Well, what are your thoughts there, Alex? We'll do one last round. I realize we're coming to the end of time. We do have a hard stop because, of course, we have the Atlas Shrugged Book Club coming up at 7 o'clock. But Alex.
Yeah, so to me, really, I'm the thing that makes me sort of sick to my stomach is all of the various countries that are civilized in most regards, who have been doing things like recognizing the made-up entity of Palestine, which was created by the KGB in order to kind of threaten the West, right? Abu Mazen and Yasser Arafat were handpicked by the KGB. And this is sort of like the worst ever psyop, I suppose. It's just gotten out of control. Even the Norwegians, who are co-signatories on the Oslo Accords, which says that unilateral declaration cannot happen, and they signed on it. So basically, your word is nothing. You are just vile people, and 30 years later, doesn't matter what you signed on, you can just go back on it, because screw it, it's the Jews. Why not? Right? So, and anybody who even utters the words two-state solution, it's I'd actually rather they just shouted Khyber, Khyber, yeah, Yehud. It's easier for me to swallow.
Yeah. Natan, your final thoughts.
Yeah, so I think the position of the left right now, the kind of international left, is mostly anti-Israel. They come from an egalitarian view that just says, look, the people, the Israelis in Israel, they're the powerful ones. They're, they have a prosperous economy. That's why we hate them. So then it kind of it shifts, or it kind of flirts with anti-Semitism, but I wouldn't call it just blatant anti-Semitism. And I don't know what's worse, by the way. Like I actually think that being anti-Israeli is worse than just hating Jews, like, for whatever stupid reason that you have, because it's like targeting the West for all of its great achievements. But then you have the right, and the right today is scary for all the other reasons, and they really do hold these anti-Semitic views, the classic, as they're called, anti-Semitic views. And they just hate Jews for being Jews. They come from all different positions. Like some of them it comes from Christianity. Others, they're just collectivists. But it's really, like I said in the beginning, it's really disheartening to see how fast they've gained traction. I mean, I remember arguing with someone that I know about Tucker Carlson, and he said, "No way, that guy is an anti-Semite." And that was only like a year ago. And I mean, just recently he had that pseudo historian on to deny or apologize for the Holocaust. And you can clearly see where this is going. I mean, there's just you can't deny it anymore. And when you see how popular he is within the right, I mean, people are, they're how do you say it? They're like starry-eyed for this guy, and he has all of these prominent right-wing personalities who are just kind of licking up to him. So it's scary. I don't know what's going to happen, but both left and right, like Peikoff warned us in the ominous parallels, the West is starting to look like Weimar Germany. I mean, we're already in it. So
yeah, it's a good recommendation of ominous parallels to end on there. Thank you very much. Where can people find you, Natan, if they want to follow your work?
They can find me on Twitter or X. I'm the Enlightened Examiner. They can search for me in Substack under the same name. Yeah, that's it.
Okay, great. We have a couple of last-minute super chats. Knows Too Much has said, yes, being anti-Judaism and anti-Hebrew are different, which is what demonstrates my point. Using properly defined terms, it's fine to criticize a religion. And Tragedy and Comedy has said, here, there's a scared, silent majority. Sorry. And of course, I think the ability for Jews to go about their ordinary lives is without having to hide their identity, without feeling, a state of constant fear in any of the countries in the world. That is how anti-Semitism is actually felt by people, and that is the tragedy of it, and the tragedy of seeing it so prevalent in these times.
Okay, well, unfortunately, we come to the end of this. We'll find all the links in the notes of the program below. And don't forget that, the words that came for the Jews, they are still valid. The first came for the Jews. So anyway, see you tomorrow, guys, for the TDO and the TRS. Thank you for taking part, guys.
Thank you very much, and
Bye-bye.
goodbye. Bye.